Okay, we're going to start now with ethics. On your page, if you'll see page 31 there, but actually it starts on page 32, all right? By the way, Norm, where are you, sir? Is it Norm? No. I'm sorry? Nathan. David, Brother David. Nathan. What? Nathan. I got it straight now. Brother Nathan is a vice principal, and he was sharing some incredible insight with reference to critical thinking. So, Brother Rick, if you can carry that mic over to him, I'd like for him just to, or whoever has it. He was sharing some very insightful things that are very important for us today. Go for it, sir.
We just always have to be careful of what we mean by critical thinking, whether it's geared toward criticism or critical as in looking toward truth. Because critical can mean different things. And currently, persons are geared toward surface level interpretation of facts. You look at things on Instagram and you see a picture and you draw all kinds of different conclusions. They may not be focused on truth. So in many cases, what the secular education system is doing is deconstructing everything and asking people to advocate for different things, challenge establishment. And so they take all these factoids, not truth, factoids. Because we can all spit out many different facts that can lead you down a wrong path that don't stream together into in-depth truth. And students aren't taught in most cases by secular educators, in any case, to look for in-depth truth. They're looked at surface level, simple understandings that lead them to challenge, generally speaking, what we see as the Christian establishment. And so we have to be careful of what we understand in word phrases.
One of the things I've discovered as a professor, we talk about Old Testament and New Testament textual criticism. And what that means is you're not going there just exactly saying, just criticize, I don't like it. No, you're going there examining the manuscripts and all that kind of stuff and putting that together. So really what we're talking about, when we talk about critical thinking, we're talking about analytical thinking. That's probably the better term that needs to be used because most people, I'm just criticizing. No, you're analyzing. That's really what we're talking about here. All right. So we come into the area of ethics now. The foundation of Christian ethics is God and his revelation of himself through his written word, the Bible, and his living word, the person of Jesus Christ. This is our absolute moral ethic. It's lived out in our lives. This passage here, Luke 9:23 and 24, is huge. God gave this to me first couple of months after I got saved, and it has been my verse, but ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you, it grows all the time. And I don't have time to get into an exegetical analysis of this, but believe me, this verse here is the foundation of our daily walk in every way. Well, you know what? I am going to do this real quick. If anyone wishes to continue to come, I'm going to give you an amplified translation. If anyone wishes to continually come after me, let him every instance of the day when he starts thinking of himself or whatever, deny himself. And whenever he thinks of anger, bitterness, resentment, lust, whatever it is, pride, boom, take up that cross, put it to death, and then continue to follow me. Here's what I've learned. If I don't do that, I'm going to follow my flesh. Now, we're eternally in Jesus Christ. But Satan knows he can't get our soul, but he wants to screw our life up as best he can. All right? And so as I continue to follow Christ, I'm going to experience the abundant life he came to give. But exactly what you said, sir, Nathan, it's painful. We have come in a society that avoids all kinds of, listen, pain is, and it's Norm, right? That's right, I got Nathan and Norm, okay. Two ends, I got them right now. But we've come to, listen, I love this. Any of y'all ever seen Bowflex advertised on TV? They got this lady and this guy, and they got a six-pack. And they're up there doing this little bicycle, smiling. Oh, just do this, and this is how you're going to end up looking. If you come to the gym with me, I'll show you how you get there, and I guarantee you won't be smiling when you do it. But that's the way it happens. But see, we've lost sight of this. So they're selling people junk because this is the easy way. It's no pain, no, you know what? It's just not so. Learning is pain. Everything we do in our life as we grow. Okay, get off on that. Let's go to Islam. Oh, let's read Bonhoeffer. Ooh, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a man who gave his life for the truth in Nazi Germany. Who stands fast? Only the man and woman whose final standard is not his reason, his principles, his conscience, his freedom, or his virtue, but who is ready to sacrifice all this when he is called to be obedient and responsible action in faith and exclusive allegiance to God. The responsible man who tries to make his whole life an answer to the question, call of God, where are these responsible people? Now, you understand this man wasn't writing theoretically, was he? How many of you know who Dietrich Bonhoeffer was? Do you kiddos know who Dietrich Bonhoeffer is? Well, your mom and daddy will teach you. I guarantee your precious mama will. Y'all are homeschooled. You need to find out. This man lived it. He died testifying to the power of Jesus Christ under Nazism. All right, Islam. Islam also believes in an absolute moral ethic, but their source is quite different from the Christian. It's not based on the grace of God imparted to a person's life by the Holy Spirit, who lives out the life of Christ within us by his indwelling supernatural power. Rather, it is based on the supposed ability of us as human beings to live a righteous life based on Allah's commands in the Quran, and the example of Muhammad is recorded in both the Quran and the Hadith. So we've already been over that, haven't we? And we've seen the distortion, the misrepresentation of Islam. We see what Muhammad's life was really about. In addition to the life of Muhammad as being the standard for righteousness for the Muslims, there are also 5 pillars of Islam. And they are confession, prayer, fasting, almsgiving, and pilgrimage. All right? Now, go up there at that quote. I want you to see what this Abdelati is quoting here, saying Muhammad was only a mortal being commissioned by God to teach the Word of God and lead an exemplary life. He stands in history as the best model of man in piety and perfection. He is a living proof of what man can be and of what he can accomplish in the realm of excellence and virtue. Again, I encourage you to read about Muhammad, read about Islam, read about what this guy really said and really did. This is what is absolutely important. Okay? All right. So, the Islamic ethic is based on the life of a mortal man who's portrayed as the highest example of virtue and moral perfection among men. On the other hand, as one does a careful study, critical, analytical analysis, I'll put it this way, of Muhammad's life in both the Quran and the Hadith, you will find a man who, being mortal, was also incredibly corrupt. As we said, he was a pedophile. And it's really sick. Secular humanism. The ethics of secular humanism can be summed up in 2 words: moral relativism. That is, because secular humanists reject all moral codes, then out of necessity they can only resort to themselves and what they think in any given situation is right for them. In other words, this approach toward a personal morality is the apex of moral narcissism, where the individual's personal wants and desires are the grid for all decisions. Turn the page. Well, let's see. Yeah. Well, you haven't turned the page. Yeah, that's good enough. Yeah. So, down at the bottom of 33 on your page, what is really being said above, we just that quote, I don't have time to read it, but is that secular humanists reject any and all restrictions on their sexual inclinations and desires, which restrictions they consider to be immoral based on their view of morality, which is the free, unbridled pursuit of whatever sexual and sensual pleasures one may find fulfilling. This is huge. Now here's what I discovered as a young man. When we first moved out here 40 years ago, actually 41 years ago, and God opened the door for me to go to school out here. And I started reading all these ancient texts. I'd read the Bible, what the Bible said, and I'd read some, I majored in history, but not in the detail like I did of ancient Near Eastern history. And you were saying, Norm, that that's what you guys have been teaching, right? Is you're getting into to Sumer and Akkad and all that? That's incredible. As I started reading that stuff, I realized, good night, the perversion was enormous. Now, there's a guy named Hammurabi. I don't know if you've ever heard of Hammurabi. All right. He came around, in the early part of the 3rd millennium BC. All right. Second millennium by ignorance. 2nd millennium. It's around 1800 BC is when he came in and so forth and so on. So the early 2nd millennium BC. He developed what's called Hammurabi's Law Code. Now let me give you a background of this. This was not something he just wrote someday. He took together, there were some ancient Sumerian, you can read about, that wrote their own law codes. Lipid Ishtar is one guy, and he had all these law codes and all this. This is what Abraham and Sarah came out of. Now, you find liberals say, oh, the Old Testament just came out of that. It came out of all those other law codes, Hammurabi's Law Code, blah, blah. But here's what you need to do. You need to go, now that you said that about critical, I'm cautious about that, but analytical thinking, go back and read Hammurabi's Law Code, read the Bible. You realize there are similarities because of God's truth that he gave to Noah and it permeated. But where do you think the major difference lies in the law codes of these older people and what we see in the Bible? It's one 3-letter word. Begins with an S, ends with an X. Sex. It's glaring. And as I looked at that, I said, this is incredible, because this is where the perversion is. And ladies and gentlemen, you see this consistently. All the way back to 3000 BC, the oldest writings we have down today. Isn't that incredible? The sexual perversion, that it's amazing. It really is an amazing thing. Well, basically, that's what we're seeing here. All right. Let's move on now to Marxism-Leninism. As one might expect, Marxist-Leninist ethics is tied to its dialectical materialism. Thus, it is in a constant state of change in what also might be described as a form of moral relativism, again, that permeates the secular humanist ethic. Look at this quote. According to the Marxist dialectic, everything in the universe, including society, is in a state of constant change. These changes are moving society upward toward the elimination of all social and economic class distinctions. The next social advance in history will be the move from capitalism to socialism, which will inevitably result in society's moral ideals. Now, this is the apex of stupidity. Apex meaning that's right up here at the top. All right. We've seen, where's the Soviet Union today? It's non-existent. Anybody want to go live in North Korea? What about Cuba? What about China? China has, they lie, deceive, twist everything. I mean, there are a lot of, I pray for Donald Trump all the time. One of the things he right is they're stealing from us, because their economy is based on everything. There is no freedom of speech. They have a supposed outward freedom of religion, but they clamp down on anybody that criticizes the government. All right. So it's not there. So here's what we need to understand, is that socialism is a lie. To reach out and help, but Paul says you don't work, you don't eat. I mean, you go through history, you look at this biblically, you see all these things, all right? Consequently, man in his personal, relativistic, and narcissistic proclivities means all the little things we like to do, are the source of determining one's ethical grid and decision-making in all areas. And in addition, the pseudo-socioeconomic altruism means I'm going to help others, I want to help others, I want to be, okay? That is supposed to be the guiding principle of Marxist-Leninist thought, whereby all economic class distinctions are dissolved, actually becomes a cover for the greed and abject hypocrisy of Marxist leaders who live in an it should be opulent, not opulence, opulent. What is it?
Just
Who
in
live
opulence.
in,
Should live in opulence.
just scratch out the and.
Yeah.
Who live in opulence and freedom, utterly deny to their subjects. Wow. Morality, therefore, is in no way an absolute truth that guides mankind through the ages, but rather it is in complete subjection to whatever the current need is at the time to advance what is determined by the Marxist leader to be what he deems is best for his own personalized Marxist-Leninist agenda. I think the quintessential example of that in our day and time is Kim Jong-un, North Korea. Huh? That guy's a pervert to the core. He takes young, well, I'm going to get into all this. He's bad news. Anyway, this is what we see. This is going on, okay? Turn the page. I'm sorry, y'all turn the page or not? Hold on.
Yeah, we can.
I'm not going to read that whole quote. You can read it for yourself. I think it's something that's very important for you to look at. That's why I have all this stuff here. Y'all can go back and read this as you will. Let's see here. Yeah. Going down there to the bottom of, bottom of, where are we now? Yeah, page 36, that second paragraph, morality. Morality, therefore, for the Marxists is that which complements the flow of history to what they consider is a classless society. Soviet Union, Cuba, China, North Korea, Marxist states, okay? But there is an unequivocal class distinction within these societies. For example, do all the Cuban people live as well, hey, obviously one is dead, one's barely alive now. Castro brothers? Do the Castro brothers live as the rest of the Cubans? Does Kim Jong, it should be Kim Jong-un now, not the third, live as his North Korean subjects? Do they live as he does? You see that, man, the opulence, you see the poverty, people are starving to death. So this is the real picture. The answer to both these questions is unequivocal no. All right. Over there to the, down at the bottom there, Nikita Khrushchev, former president of the Soviet Union, made the following statement. So long as classes exist on earth, there will be no such thing in life as something good in the absolute sense. What is good for the bourgeoisie, for the imperialist, is disastrous for the working class, and on the contrary, what is good for the working people is not admitted by the imperialist, by the bourgeoisie. In other words, there can be no one central ethic for all the people because the class structure, by its own nature, abrogates any such concept along a universal line. Now, when you read this, and yet you look at communism and the way it's lived out, you realize this is the apex of hypocrisy, stupidity, ignorance, and absolute utter tyranny. Okay? Thus, according to Marxist ethicists, Christian ethics is the means by which rich control the working poor class. Now, let me give you a background here. Any of you know very much about the Orthodox Church in Russia, or the history of the Orthodox Church? When I went to Bulgaria right after the Iron Curtain fell, the Orthodox priests walked around there with their black hats, black head, like this. When the Tsar was in control, the Orthodox Church was in absolute control of the people. There was no analytical thinking. There was no questioning them. You questioned them, like questioning the king, you were put down. And many of those priests and the leaders lived very, very well because they were in line with the Tsar, and yet the common man was out there had hardly anything. So really, in all honesty now, you see what they were fighting against. This is what many of them, this is all they saw of the church because they didn't read the study of the Bible like we had. They didn't have that. So that was their view of what Christianity was. So here's what I'm saying to you. The Catholic Church became as corrupt as any other political system ever did. That's why when God raised up Martin Luther to do what he did, exposing the lies and deceit of that structure. Ladies and gentlemen, God has to continue to do that. Why? Because even as believers, we're still corrupt, flawed, skewed people. It's about a relationship with Jesus. It's coming back. And you go through all of these things. When you read the Gospels, you realize what it's supposed to be. But because of our human nature, mankind exploits. The word faith movement. Some of the most perverse teaching I've ever seen. One of the most recent teachers in Atlanta, this black pastor, was wanting people to give him all this money so he could buy his own personal airplane. What did that have to do with the gospel of Jesus Christ being proclaimed? Not one thing. The point I'm making is this. As believers in Jesus Christ, we must be very conscious of the fact of how we live. This is what others identify Christianity with. We're all flawed, skewed people. When we make a mistake, oh gosh, I failed. This is wrong. Da-da-da-da-da. This is what needs to be seen. But the contrast of this is that the communist leaders became exactly what they were criticizing. Isn't that fascinating? They became the tyrannical, despotic leaders that they saw in the church. They became the very same thing. All right. Now, look down there. Consequently, a hatred for the bourgeoisie or middle class who owns anything is central to the Marxist ethic because this hatred is generated by jealous self-pity, which is the core of Marxist manipulation of the people now and control of the lower, uneducated working class of people. Can you believe that? These people, they're not educated, they haven't read anything, and they just, oh, they didn't fair, look at those people. And all they're doing is getting those people to rebel so they in turn can take the place of the bourgeoisie and be control of the people. This is the hypocrisy of Marxist-Leninism, okay?
I like today.
Do what?
I like today. Those are
Unequivocally, Mother, that is true, okay? Now, I'll take time to read this paragraph, you can read that, but look down here. Therefore, this is important, that which is called utilitarianism is the foundational principle of the Marxist ethic, which is what we have already alluded to. That is simply means that their ultimate goal, the dictatorship of the proletariat, substantiates and justifies any and all ends that are necessary to achieve that goal. Look down there at this quote. This is good. The communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communist revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. This is what Antifa is about. You need to understand that, ladies and gentlemen. Anti-fascist, they're as fascist as anything I've ever seen, all right? As you can see, once again, their ethic is whatever it takes to achieve their end of the establishment of the dictatorship of the proletariat, including the killing of whoever and how many it may take to achieve that end, regardless of whether or not one is a military combatant. Khrushchev states it clearly. This is huge right here. Our cause is sacred. He whose hand will tremble, who will stop midway, whose knees will shake before he destroys tens and hundreds of enemies, he will lead the revolution into danger. Whoever will spare a few lives of enemies will pay for it with hundreds and thousands of lives of the better sons and daughters. So anyway, what we see here, their ethic, is that their ethic is whatever achieves our means, that's right, that's okay. No holds barred, okay? Cosmic humanism, okay? Cosmic humanism's ethic has as its source the same source that Marxist-Leninism has, man. Cosmic humanism's ethical perspective is based on its theological pantheism, that everything is God and God is everything, and philosophical monism, that there's only one substance. That's it. There's one substance of everything. If each of us is God, then final authority resides in us, and we must seek the freedom to act in harmony with our inner truth. Free will, says Shirley MacLaine, is simply the enactment of the realization you are God, a realization that you are divine. Free will is making everything accessible to you. Now, that is pretty intense, isn't it? I want us to turn over again, and we looked at this last night, but this basically is saying the same thing here. You can read that. Turn over there and let's look at, see, for me it's on page 40, for you, so at the bottom of 39. We read this last night, but I want us to look at it again. Now the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, indeed, has God said, you shall not eat from any tree of the garden? That isn't what God said. He said, you can eat of any tree, but not the one in the middle. The woman said to the serpent, from the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but from the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat from it or touch it, lest you die. And the serpent said to the woman, you surely shall not. I told y'all that is a really emphatic statement. Really what he's saying is, to die you will not die. That's what's called an emphatic absolute. Anyway, an infinitive absolute. It's very emphatic in Hebrew. Now the English tries to make it emphatic by putting surely an exclamation point. But when you read this thing in Hebrew, if you read it in Hebrew, it'd grab you by the neck, put you up against the wall, and you'd say, whoa. So it is an emphatic denial, and this is what I told you. We've read it, the passage there in Genesis 2, 15 through 17. But God was emphatic, said, if you eat this to die, you will die. Satan says, if you eat this to die, you will not die. Equally emphatic. All right. But the idea here that you will be like God. Now, the King James Version, literally translated correctly, Elohim is the words gods. You will be your own God. There'll be many gods running around. Isn't that amazing? That's exactly what all of these other isms are talking about. You become your own God. You're the ultimate source of everything. All right? Go down there, look at that there on page 40. Let me see where you are. Here. I'll turn the page here. Lo siento. Yeah. In the middle paragraph, that which is of great significance. And the moral relativism that is practiced by cosmic humanists is that its primary focus is in the arena of what? Wow. Shakti Gawan. This is what she says. If you're setting limits on your sexual energy, it becomes distorted. If you believe it is something to be hidden, ignored, and controlled, then you learn to hold back completely or act sexually only at safe certain moments. Thus, if I place any limitations on my sexual energy, then I am actually living a distorted life versus living a non-distorted life by giving license to anything I want to do. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is absolutely huge. Now, I use this example over here. We looked at that last night. John 4:15. We talk about, now, growing up as I did as a little boy, boys are snails. What is it, Mother? Dogs and snails and dog tails. Girls with sugar and spice, everything nice. Ladies and gentlemen, as I've grown up, that's not true. You know who some of the most narcissistic, selfish, self-centered people are that I see at the gym today?
Yeah. Women.
Young women. You work out in the gym, you go there, you have machines like, man, working. Yeah, sure, come on in and work out. This I told you all that last night about the lady, and so I said, wow, that's amazing. But that's real. So ladies, you guys are the same as everybody else. And we come down here to this passage here where the woman, the Samaritan woman, Jesus getting water, and the woman said to him, he said, I have water that you will never thirst again. He says, give me this water, I don't ever thirst again. Jesus said, go call your husband, come. She said, I don't have a husband. He said, well, you're right, you don't have a husband. The guy you live with, you've had 5, and the guy you live with now is not. She says, oh, I perceive you're a prophet. So she immediately tries to shift the conversation from that away to where you're supposed to go worship, which was all about what? Religion, not a relationship. And Jesus said, woman, believe me, an hour is coming, neither you in this mountain or in the Jerusalem should you worship the Father. You worship what you don't know. We worship what we know. Verse 23, an hour is coming now when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father seeks to worship him. God is spirit. We talked about that last night. Saying the Word was God, God is spirit means this is who he is. Jesus is the eternal Word. God is eternal spirit. That's why he said don't make images, because they don't exist. What man is doing is really worshiping himself. All right. Then we come over here, also, turn the page, to John 8. I'm not going to read through that whole thing, but this was a setup. Now, let me just say this. I firmly believe that 8, 1 through 11 is absolutely authentic, that Jesus did this. It's not in some of the earlier manuscripts, but it is there, and I think this characterizes exactly who Jesus was, what he did. But the Pharisees set this thing up. They had caught this woman in adultery. When you caught a woman in adultery, what were you supposed to do there? Well, Leviticus 20, 10 through 16, you were supposed to bring the guy and the lady. All they did was bring the woman. So obviously they had it set up with a friend of theirs and so forth and so on. Jesus looks down and says, he that is without sin, let him cast the first stone. I think what he was writing is this portion of Scripture in Leviticus, and they all walked away. Basically, he tells the woman, I don't condemn you, but go and sin no more. In other words, you've repented, you've changed. Let God be the source of your life and all that you do now. The point I want to make is this. In these two arenas, what we see is sexual sin. Sexual sin is destructive. The woman in Samaria had 5 husbands, and the guy she lived with she was not married to. She was desperately, 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 desperately seeking. Now, my precious wife deals with a lot of women who have daughters in this kind of situation. I'll let you talk about that, Mama. Do you want to say anything about that? No, okay, she says no. But she deals with a lot of this, and you find these young women are desperately looking for their identity in some guy. And a recent situation came up. This young woman's she has a profession, doing really well, and she is with a guy that's an animal. And you say, why in the world would she get hooked up with something like that? She's looking for security. She's looking for her identity, and so forth and so on. So, ladies, I just want to say this. All of us, we're all old married folks here, except for these young people over here. The reality is that sex is not, and that's a pull. Next to air, water, food, sex is a very strong natural desire that we have. If we didn't have it, we wouldn't be sitting here, none of us, okay? And yet we also realize and see that it is the one area that's always exploited. In our lives before we're Christians, in our lives as Christians, but sin that we've had before Christ, after Christ, God brings us to that place of brokenness. And as we look at the conclusion, when we get to that today, we look at some of the men that fell in this area. Samson was one. David certainly was one. And yet we see the difference in David's life and Saul's life. Saul never owned his sin, did he? He always blamed other people. David owned his sin. And Psalm 51 to me is the powerful passage of brokenness. So for us, we need to understand as Christians, if you've sinned before after that or after Christ, we come back to him, he gets our life straight, and we put that in its proper place. Because to me, sex can be like any other addiction. It can be like substance abuse or whatever. It can be a destructive thing that you never find the ultimate thing you're looking for, but it becomes an enslaving, destructive thing. Okay. Saying enough about that. Turn over now to page. That page is a little bit different here. Wait a minute. Hold on. Okay, on page 44, yes. Now, well, actually, at the bottom of page 43, I'm sorry. On the other hand, as already been indicated, moral relativism in the sexual arena is in no way uniquely focused on women. Ooh. A man named Randall Barr, who was himself at one time a proponent of cosmic humanism as his grid for life, but then he committed his life to Christ, explains just what happened, just what the foundational core belief of cosmic humanism is. Boom. Create your own reality according to what feels right for you. Whether you choose to be homosexual, bisexual, monogamous, polygamous, etc., any choice you make is acceptable as long as it's right for me. Does that sound like anything we hear today? Or it's done with love and no one's hurt. This is a kind of relativistic, human-founded ethics, or design your own ethics. In effect, New Age followers pick and choose from the multitudes of options in each area of life according to personal preferences. Those of us in all of our lives, as we've sinned in this area, we've come back and broken before Christ, and we realize, God, what a lie that was. That happens with all of us. All right. Adolf Hitler prevailed in Germany. Thus, according to cosmic humanism's ethic, what Hitler did cannot be called evil, since he was doing what was right for him. And the whole idea and definition of hurt someone is totally relative to the person who is dominating through his or her view of right and wrong. Isn't that amazing? So this is what we need to understand. And I'm very grateful that Nathan brought that out about what we see today with the attitude. They just want to throw away everything without going to really pursuing what is the truth on this. And that's what we've got to insist on. Okay? All right. In conclusion, therefore, we can see that the cosmic humanist ethic is convoluted at best, and at worst, it is the apex of hypocrisy, exposing its narcissistic foundation for the lie that it is, and such narcissism can only lead to the exploitation and subjugation of those whose divine state is not as strong and dominant as another, and thus the weaker will have to submit out of necessity in order to survive the implementation of the right of the stronger divine state, of the stronger divine state. And this is called totalitarianism. So this is what we need to look at when we listen to this junk. But listen to me, and I'm sure that Nathan has seen this and Norm has seen this. I've seen this. When you start talking with somebody, blah, 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 blah. I just zip the lip. And remember, as we read last night, 2 Timothy 2, 23 through 26. Be gentle, patient when wrong, that we in turn might cause that person to repent. Right? No. What? That who's going to lead them to repentance? God, not us. That God might bring them and lead them, bring to that place of repentance. Keep that in mind. You're not going to argue somebody into truth. Speak the truth. There's a guy I work with, an older gentleman. He says all kinds of stuff to me, blah, 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 blah. And I say, so-and-so, I love you, and I pray for you all the time. So I met him, he said, thank you for your prayers. Okay. Postmodernism. Postmodernism from the secular perspective encourages rejection of a divine being to whom we as human beings are accountable. What they do encourage, however, is a type of human accountability to one another, but it is at this point of what might be termed as the ethical development of postmodern thinking that its supporters have their quandary. A man named Richard Rorty, who is a postmodern thinker and one of its ardent proponents, has written a book entitled Achieving Our Country, Leftist Thought in 20th Century America. And he lays out in no unmistakable terms what he sees as the proper perspective of the ethic that should be the driving force and foundation of our country. In doing so, he makes reference to two men, Walt Whitman and John Dewey. Now, you know, Dewey was a great educator who basically set the standard of what we have today, tragically, in our country in secular education. Whitman was a poet, but I want to read this down here because this is significant here. Both Dewey and Whitman view the United States as an opportunity to see ultimate significance in a finite human historical project rather than in something eternal and non-human. They both hope that America would be the place where a religion of love would finally replace a religion of fear. Now remember, when they say love, you know what they mean? Do anything you want to and just accept anybody. Don't criticize anybody for what they're. That's what are you talking about, okay? They dreamed that America would break the traditional link between the religious impulse, the impulse to stand in awe of something greater than oneself, and the infantile need for security, the childish hope of escaping from time to time. See, what a prideful, let me tell you, folks, When you are your own security, you are full of lust, selfishness, greed, narcissistic pride, and arrogance, are you not? Because your whole thing is, I am better than others. Am I right? Absolutely right. Because that's what Jesus dealt with his disciples continually. That's part of our natural depravity. All right? They wanted to preserve the former and discard the latter. That is, to preserve a narcissistic, humanistic focus versus a God-centered, selfless focus. That's my note, by the way. They wanted to put hope for a casteist and classless America in the place of traditionally occupied by the knowledge and will of God. They wanted that utopian America to replace God as the unconditional object of desire. Wow. They wanted the struggle for social justice to be the country's animating principle, the nation's soul. We see that today, but let me tell you what that does. That ends up in tyranny. Now, as I said, I've gone face to face with Klansmen, but let me just say this. The Black Lives Matter movement today is as racist as any Klansman I've ever seen and gone face to face with. All lives matter. You see la raza, which means the race. ¿Cuántas personas aquí que pueden hablar español? Okay, uno, dos. Is there any people who speak Spanish? Anyway, la raza means the race. Same exact thing. You're talking about racist. It is at the core. And everybody owes them something. Okay, any group like that you see that's the reality, okay? For both Whitman and Dewey, the terms American democracy is shorthand for a new conception of what is to be human, a conception which has no room for obedience to a non-human authority, and in which nothing save freely achieved consensus among human beings has any authority at all. So that means when we reach a consensus on doesn't matter what it's about, then that becomes the absolute truth. So then we change the truth all the time, exactly what Nathan was saying. We just reshape it, remold it, whatever we want it to become at the particular time. All right? So that's pretty much on what we'll move on down here to the other. The reason for using Rorty's book as a reference is that, as I initially said, Dewey's influence, public education has had enormous effects today, philosophy, I'm having a hard time speaking, I'm trying to do it fast. Philosophical, psychological, and educational emphases, and those emphases became the foundation of what we have today. Whitman's Leaves of Grass is an incredible statement. I want you to look down there at his quote. Through me, forbidden voices, voices of sexes and lust, voices veiled and I remove the veil, voices indecent, by me clarified and transfigured. I do not press my fingers across my mouth. I keep as delicate around the bowels as us around the head and heart. Copulation is no more rank to me than death is. Now, maybe many of you didn't know all this about Walt Whitman. You just heard certain things. I believe in the flesh and the appetite, seeing, hearing, feeling are miracles, and each part and tag of me is a miracle. Divine am I inside and out, and I make holy whatever I touch or am touched from. The scent of these armpits aroma finer than prayer, this head more than churches, Bibles, and all the creeds. I think if you smelled me after I came back from the gym, you might disagree with that. So we see that Dewey's focus was primarily academic and intellectual. Whitman's, on the other hand, was more blue-collar, dealing to the person. Oh, yeah, my emotions. Oh, I can have anything I want. Oh, I'm fine. Nothing wrong with this. All right. Rorty has this other book, Philosophy and Social Hope. Read this. This is powerful. More specifically, we see both intellectual and moral progress not as a matter of getting closer to the true or the good or the right, but as an increase in imaginative power. We see imagination as the cutting edge of cultural evolution, the power which, given peace and prosperity, constantly operates so as to make the human future richer than the human past. Imagination is the source of both new scientific pictures of the physical universe and new conceptions of possible communities. So we see this continuous perversion just being promoted. Look down at that final quote. To debate the utility of the set of social constructs we call human rights is to debate the question of whether inclusivist societies are better than exclusivist ones. That is to debate the question of whether communities which encourage tolerance of harmless deviance should be preserved to those communities whose social cohesion depends on conformity, on keeping outsiders at a distance, and on eliminating people who try to corrupt the youth. The best single mark of our progress toward a fully fledged human rights culture may be the extent to which we stop interfering with our children's marriage plans because of the national origin, religion, race, or wealth of the intended partner, because the marriage will be homosexual rather than heterosexual. Does this sound like something we are living in and dealing with today? As I say down home, does a cow moo, does a dog bark, and a kitty meow? Yes. And is Mississippi State going to beat Ole Miss this year? Yes. In the most striking pictures, we come to an end, then we'll have a Q&A time and have our lunch break here. Are we ready for the lunch or not? Which are okay. Well, then we'll get started on the biology thing. We'll just go for it. In one of the most striking pictures of the reality of such a world where constant change is the standard based on the changing moral and ethical proclivities of the population, Theodore Dalrymple describes the consequences of such a society in an incredibly clear, unvarnished, and absolutely honest appraisal of what he saw and experienced as a physician and psychiatrist in the slums of London among the extreme poor. Now, I'm going to tell you, as we read this thing, this is huge, okay? So let's read this quote here, and then we'll take a break. We'll have Q&A and take a break. If anyone wants to see what sexual relations are like, freed of contractual and social obligations, let him look at the chaos of the personal lives of members of the underclass. Here are abortions procured by abominable kung fu, children who have children in numbers unknown before the advent of chemical contraception and sex education, women abandoned by the father of their child a month before or a month after delivery, insensate jealousy, in other words, unrestrained jealousy, the reverse of the coin of general promiscuity that results in the most hideous oppression and violence, serial stepfatherhood that leads to sexual and physical abuse of children on a mass scale, and every kind of loosening of the distinction between the sexual permissible and impermissible. The truth gives us life, but the lie destroys. So this is a pretty intense study that we went through in this ethical thing. But here's the thing, and again, don't just take my word for it, but analyze it. Use the word analyze. But seriously, you understand what I mean by critical thinking. Go back and look at this, examine it for yourself. As I say when I'm teaching a class, I love when I make a mistake. Because I tell my students, aha, you see, I'm just a skewed, flawed guy. You've got to read this and know this for yourself. This is what's important. Okay, we will have a Q&A time now. So, anybody have any questions, answers, or comments, please?
On page 47, could you read that one little paragraph in the middle about Rorty's perspective? It's a good
Page 47 in the middle.
Uh-huh.
Oh, more specifically?
No, thus once again, according to...
What I said.
That's an important one.
Thus, once again, according to Rorty's perspective, there is no absolute truth or moral goodness to which man should aim, but rather man should let his imagination create constant social change, which is the only real standard men can or should have. Therefore, the standard should be no standard, and the following demonstrates his perspective in very practical terms there. So that is absolutely the case. And this is important for us to understand. This is what we're dealing with. So let me just say this. What's going to change people? What changed Justin Alfred's heart? Was Jesus. Not me, because I'm a corrupt, flawed, skewed person, as all of us here. but Jesus. So that's why it was asked the other night, what should we do as the body? Number one, that brokenness needs to take place in our lives, first of all. Coming surrendered to Jesus, addressing our own sins, bringing every thought captive, coming where he's increasing and we're decreasing. That in turn, just like me seeing that guy at the gym, that in turn is going to affect other people, little by little. Like that young girl that prayed for me 9 months every day. 9 months in one day. And I got saved on the first day after the beginning of the 10th month. Any other comments or questions, please? Yes, ma'am. Let him get the microphone there to you.
I'll just encourage us to remember that as we look at these philosophies, these are ideas, but they significantly impact people. So when you think about communist Russia, for example, and you talk about the dichotomy between the very few wealthy, extravagantly, disgustingly wealthy, and everybody else, those everybody else's have no hope.
That's true.
They are in bondage and they can do nothing about it, and they might not even know they're in bondage, and they don't know what their life is like. So hopefully the study of this will make us more compassionate.
That's good.
And compel us to take action by praying for those, by speaking up, by doing something, and not just becoming self-righteous knowledge people.
Ma'am, you hit the nail on the unadulterated epicenter. That is exactly correct. Let me just say this. That's why what we see in our country today, tragically, the exploitation of people based on ignorance. I mean, the Antifa, I listened to those kids, they were just cussing. You know, there were 20 people at that rally there in Washington last week. You know, there was white supremacists. 20 people. I mean, so we could have had our own rally there in Washington, you know what I'm saying, with these people. But you had the Antifa, they just cussing and swearing, you know, and they're blind to the fact that they are the fascists. They're not anti-fascists. They are for fascism. That is, they don't want any speech. Period. The white supremacists, the Nazis, has every right to speak, but I have every right to get up and speak and expose them for what they are. That's what freedom of speech does. But what they're looking at is a totalitarian type thing, and what you're saying is true. Like a lot of people who haven't had, you see the extremely rich, but and it's going back and understanding, like in communist Russia, because when I studied that, I saw that what Lenin and Marx, or not so much Marx, but Lenin, he was dead, but what Lenin saw in Stalin is they saw the Orthodox Church living in this opulent thing, and the people out there didn't have anything to eat with. I mean, so that's really what's significant for us to do there. Yes, sir. But that's a great point. It's what we need to do is be aware of where people are coming from. But I will say this, as a young man, as I said, my mom and I grew up. My mama had 3 jobs at one time. I started cutting grass at 10. I mean, I just worked hard. I was around people where I lived in North Jackson, very wealthy people I went to school with. But I never had jealousy. I never had anything like that. And it was because of the way I was raised. It was because of my mother. I didn't become a Christian, but she was, and we had that gospel influence. But this idea, this is what socialism feeds off of, is self-pity and jealousy and resentment and bitterness. They've got that, I should have, it's not fair that they have it, and all that kind of junk. So that's something that has to be addressed, but it has to be addressed properly. I'm fairly intense, and but when I talk with people, non-believers, a different personality. Oh, really? Wow! I listen to them. Just like 2 Timothy 2 23 through 26. That is how we've got to be. Because if you come there argumentative, you're done and you're finished. Does that make sense, ma'am? Does that coincide with what you're wanting to say? Very good. Yes, sir.
Yeah, first of all, I really appreciate the fact that you're here and that we're getting an overview of that, and I think every Christian should have an understanding of worldviews. But I would be very interested in, as a Christian, in a world where there isn't a lot of critical thinking or
analytical
thinking. And where people look at themselves as victims rather than looking towards accountability, how as a Christian, we can be effective in talking to people with different worldview perspectives.
This guy that's at the gym, I've been working out here at this gym for almost 20 years, 18 years. I've seen him off and on. We've talked. And I'm just now seeing a change in his life. He sends me these emails. Some of them are just off the wall. And some I respond to. I respond very lovingly, graciously. And I say, I want you to read this. I want you to read this. I want you to check this out. And I don't argue with him. And I'm not kidding you. Let's see, this is Saturday. So maybe it was yesterday. It was yesterday, Wednesday. I forget which day it was. And I came up to him, and the week before he said something, made some comment about me. And so I don't know what God's doing in his life, but God's doing something. So here's what I can say to us. In fact, not me saying, let's turn our Bibles. And keep your microphone because I'm going to have you read this, sir. Let's turn to Isaiah chapter 40. We typically, when we want change, we want it a month ago, don't we? So when we come to Isaiah chapter 40, we read some incredibly powerful things here, beginning in verse 27. Go ahead and start reading this, sir. Isaiah 40, 27.
Why do you
Now,
say...
as you read, I'm going to make little exegetical comments, okay?
So pause.
Yeah.
Be perceptive, okay. Why do you say,
Why do you continually say, O Jacob?
And speak, O Israel.
And continually speak. And this word speak doesn't just mean speak. It's a PL. What does the PL indicate, Jordan? You need to go back. And why do you continue? It's intensive. So in other words, they're continually saying, they're continually speaking, oh, God, where are you? God, where are you? God. This is what they're doing. Okay, keep going.
My way is hidden from the Lord, and my just claim is passed over by my God. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth.
Continual. This creator means the one who started from beginning to end. Okay, keep going.
Neither faints nor is weary. His understanding is unsearchable.
Now let me stop right there. Remember last night we talked about that little word there in Psalm 14, ayin, which says his understanding is inscrutable, means you can't even begin to comprehend it. But see, this is what we want in our flesh. We want to be able to have it comprehended. Oh, it fits together. We want to deify ourselves. Keep going.
He gives power to the weak.
He continually, that word gives there, he continually, hallelujah, gives power to the weak. Go ahead.
And to those who have no might.
And to those that no might, again, that's that word ayin, where there doesn't even exist any might. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me just say this. What I've seen God do in my life is that very thing. Bring me to the end of myself, where I don't have any might. I realize, Lord, it's all about you, it's not me. Keep going.
He increases strength. Even the youths shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. But those who wait on the Lord...
Those who are continually waiting, putting their trust in, relying upon him. Keep going.
Shall renew their strength. They shall mount up.
They shall continually mount up.
With wings like eagles. They shall run.
Continually run.
And not be weary. They shall walk.
Continually walk.
And not faint.
You ought to look at my wife. She goes, oh, you done it. The reason I do that is because I want you to get the emphasis that's there. This is talking about on a continuous, ongoing thing. So what does it say here, ladies and gentlemen? Waiting on the Lord is painful. It's trying. The enemy is going to hit you and say, what do you mean wait on God? God's not doing anything. Look at this. You're stupid. You're an imbecile. You have to get out there and do da-da-da-da-da, right? I've done that, and I've sucked wind badly. I've learned to wait on the Lord. Did that help answer that?
Yes.
Anybody else? Any other questions, comments? Go for it.
Now, if I can just phrase what I was thinking about. It's my belief that any worldview other than the Christian worldview is the reason why the world has things like human trafficking.
Oh, of course.
And I was thinking maybe you could comment on that. I just think that's one of the worst things, and the depravity of mind that would cause someone to think that that's okay in any way.
What we just read about with postmodernism and secular humanism is whatever you make up is right is right. Are you with me? Yeah. That's how those people, listen, these things that we talk about that have kind of been delineated and, organized and coordinated, this is how people have always lived anyway. As I say, you go back to ancient Sumer and you read those writings going back to 3000 BC and on, you realize it's the same thing all the time. Whatever makes you feel good, you do it. That's what's right. So that is where we're coming from. Now we've sanitized postmodernism, secular humanism, blah blah blah, but all it really is this perverted, corrupt, depraved self-deification of humanity. And that leads to every kind of perversion that's out there. And as we talked about here, the sexual perversion is right up here at the top. Isn't that amazing? Again, if you get a chance, some of y'all, I know you're going to be in historical theology, but go back and read Hammurabi's Law Code. And you start reading that, then you go back and you read the scripture. It is an amazing thing. And again, as I said, if you go, I have a website. It's called wordinlife.com, WORDINLIFE.com. You go to the topic section. I got a bunch of stuff there you can look at and check it out.
It's in the back of the handout.
I'm sorry?
I have it in the back of the handout.
Okay, very good. Okay. Any other questions, please, comments?
Just real quick, we need to take a break and then get into the next session so we can have time for lunch. But the reality is we've got all these different worldviews. Many of them, we've been talking about this idea of critical thinking or analytical thinking. Most people don't do that, and so they are, we think of these different groups like Black Lives Matter and Antifa. They have not, most of them have not thought through.
No, you're right.
What they're about or why they're doing it. Many of these worldviews, I think one of the things that we need to realize as believers is these people are deceived.
Totally.
They are completely and totally deceived, and our response to that ought to be pity and compassion for them. They are totally lost, and many of them are totally hopeless. And their response is to lash out in the only way that they know how, based on their particular worldview. And so, again, kind of touching on what you said, Valerie, that our attitude ought to be one of humbling ourselves before God.
Ooh, wow.
and recognizing that we have been poured out a grace that they need, and that should God give us the opportunity, we ought to share that with them. But again, we ought to respond with pity, wow, not with anger, not with the other things that we see often being poured out against these different groups.
Brother Rick, you hit the nail on the unadulterated epicenter as well. It's not just philosophy. It's going to be our life, our lifestyle. All right, let's take a break.